This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. I'm Evan Jansen. The show is live as always and broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park. Don't forget we're live on YouTube right now, where the whole show always available on demand on our YouTube channel. Today, well, we'll look ahead to the Al Bashir court case that is before the High Court here in South Africa. We'll be crossing live to court proceedings at 10 a.m. this morning. Also, we'll get an update from Parliament after last night's debate there. Ulrich Hendricks gives us an update on the trifecta trial that's on in Kimberley. Then we ask the question, why are young men increasingly at risk of testicular cancer? And we close the show with a look at cruelty to animals, with two recent cases catching the eye here in South Africa. But first, let's get the day's news from Anine Dormel.
Good morning, I'm Anine Dormel. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. Government is expected to present an affidavit to the High Court in Pretoria today on the Omar al-Bashir saga. Last week, the Sudanese president left South Africa while an interim court order prohibiting this was in place. The High Court ruled that al-Bashir should be detained under an international criminal court indictment on war crime charges. Meanwhile, the al-Bashir issue was hotly debated in the National Assembly last night.
We want to reinstate the ANC noble policies of holding on to the human rights culture and the rule of law.
When the warrant was first issued in 2009, the then Director General for International Relations and Cooperation, Dr. Ayanda Nsabula, had the following. He said, if today President al-Bashir landed in terms of the provision of the Rome Statute, he would have to be arrested.
It was naive for whoever took the government to court to think that it can be wise to arrest a head of state here in South Africa. It was going to lead to instability in the origin country where he came from. It was going to even threaten our security in South Africa.
Judgment is expected to begin today in the John Block and trifecta fraud case. The judgment in the multi-million rand fraud, corruption and money laundering case will be handed down in the Northern Cape High Court. The case involving the ANC provincial chairperson, provincial secretary Alvin Boertes and businessman Christus Scholes relates to the provincial government leasing office space from the trifecta group of companies at inflated prices. They have all pleaded not guilty to the charges. Two South African youths taken from their grandmother's home in Mpumalanga have been handed to South African government officials in Malawi. The two have been out of the country for a year. It's alleged the two, aged 14 and 20, were lured away by Malawian women with promises of a better education in the United Kingdom. South Africa is likely to lose an estimated 1.4 billion rand of tourism revenue this year. This is a finding from the study by the Tourism Business Council of South Africa that was released yesterday. It says last year alone the country saw a decline of around 66,000 tourists. The council blames this on changes in regulations. Governments want people coming into the country to appear in person while applying for a visa. It also requires that all minors travelling to and from South Africa to be in possession of an unabridged birth certificate. And in Pakistan, the death toll from a heat wave in the country's Sindh province has risen to nearly 700. Temperatures have touched 44 degrees Celsius in the port city of Karachi in recent days. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much to Anine there for that news update. Time for us to look at some of the issues in the news. Deputy Minister in the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Obed Bapela, made it clear there was no way government was ever going to arrest Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir. He argued that the African Union was not a platform for arresting African leaders. The Democratic Alliance and other opposition parties accused the government of criminally flouting the country's law and constitution. The EFF in turn agreed with the ANC's view that the ICC is biased against African leaders, but suggested that the court should rather arrest al-Bashir in his own country. the issue is likely to haunt this country for some time, it seems. Now, our parliamentary reporter, Lucanio Kalata, was up until late last night to follow the debate in Parliament. He joins us this morning from Cape Town. Very good morning to you, Lucanio. Thanks for joining us again.
Good morning, Eben.
Late night on the benches there. It must have been quite heated, huh?
Eben, it's one of those late nights that you don't particularly care for because what is being discussed is really such a critical matter. And I think the debate started off essentially with the Deputy Speaker, Lechisa Chinodi, making it very clear that it was taking place under Rule 67 of the Rules of the National Assembly, and that essentially prohibited the members of Parliament from discussing the nitty-gritty, the actual merits of the case. Remember, it is coming before the North Gauteng High Court this morning, this matter of President al-Bashir. So that's how it started. Despite the stern warning by the Deputy Speaker, Eben, I can tell you that the Democratic Alliance was still very scathing. At some point, Stevens Mogalapa, who led the debate, on behalf of Musi Maimane, the Democratic Alliance had originally called for the snap debate, so they were allowed to take the podium first. And Mr. Mogalapa basically said that the government had actually been complicit in a crime by allowing President Omar al-Bashir to leave the country. But then the ANC hit back. Obed Bapela, who's the minister who heads basically the ANC subcommittee on international relations, he's called into question the ICC's credibility, saying that the ICC has now lost its direction. And he then also called for reforms, saying that the UN Security Council must no longer have the powers to be able to refer matters to the International Criminal Court. And then Lindiwe Zulu, Minister of Small Business Development, she was speaking on behalf of the government. And she came on and then she basically said if opposition parties had realistically expected that the government would detain President al-Bashir in the country, they best think again. Eben.
The reaction was somewhat varied from opposition parties, but calling it a crime and being complicit in a crime by some, while others say the arrest should have been made in Sudan.
Eben, yes, reactions were quite varied, or opinions at least were quite varied. I mean, the EFF, as you mentioned earlier, they basically said that the ICC, if they want President al-Bashir, they must go and arrest him in Khartoum. They know where he is. He is in Khartoum, so if they want him, they must go and get him there. But the EFF did stress that although they don't agree with the ICC and everything that happens, they strongly reject the fact that the South African government had openly defied a court order, and they stressed that that could become a precedent where we start seeing more and more court orders being defied by the government. The Freedom Front Plus, basically, it stated that the matter of FIFA, the current allegations about bribery relating to FIFA, they were saying that the al-Bashir matter is going to make that matter look like a Sunday school picnic. But then again, on the other hand, you had a political party such as the APC, headed by Themba Godi here in Parliament, and they were saying, but what's the big halubalu? President al-Bashir has visited many other African countries, many other African states, and there was nothing being said about him being arrested in those countries. So they couldn't understand why it was that when he then visited South Africa, there was then this big outcry that he be arrested. Eben.
Is he alluding to political opportunism in this case?
I think he did, yeah. I mean, he didn't come outright and use the words political opportunism, but he did say that the institution that had gone to the courts, for this court order to have President al-Bashir detained in South Africa, he did call that institution very repulsive. He called it a reactionary institution, you know. So I think you were right by saying that he alluded to political opportunism, although he didn't use those exact words. Eben.
Just to go back and look at what's come out, it seems after the discussions last night that the withdrawal of South Africa out of the ICC almost seems a fait accompli. Are you in agreement somewhat with that?
Ibn, I would potentially like to say yes. I think the ANC last night, once again, Mr. Obed Bapela, who heads the subcommittee on international relations, he intimated that the ICC is a voluntary body and that South Africa had volunteered itself to be a member of the ICC and be a member and be part of the Roman Statute. So, and basically, because they volunteered to be there, they can volunteer to withdraw themselves out of it. We know that the ANC is the ruling party in South Africa, so what the ANC says and what the ANC wants, 10 to 1, they are likely to get it. I think maybe it is a foregone conclusion that South Africa will withdraw as a member of the ICC. Eben?
Lucanio, thank you very much for that update. Working very hard in Parliament is Lucanio Kalata these days. He was late there last night, back early this morning. Of course, just to recap, the Bashir issue was that hot debate in the National Assembly last night. Several ANC MPs hinted strongly during the debate that the party believes South Africa should withdraw from the International Criminal Court.
The debate began with a stern warning from Deputy Speaker Lechisa Tsenodi.
We must responsibly address matters that are before the courts without reference to their merits or demerits. We can discuss everything else around those matters without any reference to the merits or demerits of the case. If we do that, we are in contempt of our own rules.
Despite this, the DA was still scathing. It accused the government of being, among others, in contempt of court when it allowed President al-Bashir to board a plane and head home, when he should instead have been arrested and handed over to the International Criminal Court.
The ANC government, led by Jacob Zuma, has committed a crime of assisting a wanted man to run from the law. Let us for a moment think about what allowing Mr. al-Bashir to evade the law means to the 300,000 people who were murdered and the 2.5 million people who were displaced in Darfur.
But the ANC hit back, accusing the ICC of having lost its moral authority.
The ICC is losing its direction, its credibility, is being undermined because not everybody wants to go into it. Secondly, we are calling on the United Nations Security Council to no longer have powers of referring matters to the ICC.
Can these members really think we are going to arrest a head of state? They must think again.
The EFF argued that the ICC should go and arrest al-Bashir in his home country, but that government should nonetheless not have defied a valid court order.
If ICC wants al-Bashir, it must go and fetch him in Khartoum. That is where he is found, not anywhere else. But we do not agree as the EFF with the deliberate disregard of the court orders by the ANC government, because it sets a precedent for the future defiance of courts.
Smaller parties were divided on the matter.
You lied to us. You said you'd uphold the Constitution, uphold the law, and be the example. You have misled the people of our country. And now we are ashamed before the nations of the world.
President al-Bashir has been on summits and visits to many countries before. Why this halubalu when he came to South Africa? The court action taken by that reactionary institution is very repulsive and an affront to the national interests of South Africa and the continent.
Sir, forget about FIFA. The al-Bashir crisis makes the FIFA version look like a Sunday school picnic. No other executive act has ever exposed the ANC as a human rights violator on such a grand scale to the whole world.
The North Gauteng High Court is expected to express itself on the al-Bashir matter on Wednesday. Lucanio Kalata, SABC News, Parliament.
Views have been varied on this issue as South Africa and the continent comes to terms with what happened. But yeah, some of your views as to the al-Bashir debate that happened in Parliament yesterday. Of course, the court case is to be heard shortly. We hopefully will be there in a couple of minutes to get an update. Zeus says, a question we should ask ourselves, what would have been the result of arresting Omar al-Bashir? Calculated decisions need to be made. Bashir debate. That is a bit of sobriety there from Giuseppe. Sir Johnson Gaduza says, Bashir debate. The time for scramble, partition, divide and rule. Africa is over. We need our leaders to clean this mess the West created. Arise, Africa, says Sir Johnson. JC says, DA needs to acknowledge that we are part of the African Union and not the European Union. Arresting Bashir in South Africa would be an act of war, he says. Bashir debate. Yes, it would have been, one would think. Oscar Barca says, the EFF is right. The DA opposes for the sake of opposing. They didn't even present the best opposing statement, says Barca. Of course, many opposing views. Some call it political opportunism. What is your view on it? Send it to us at SABC Newsroom. We'll try and collate some of those comments and put it up a little bit later. Political opportunism is what some people are calling it. Now, we're not done with it. Government is expected to present an affidavit to the High Court in Pretoria on why it let the Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir leave the country while an interim court order prohibiting this was in place. The court also ruled that al-Bashir should be detained under an international criminal court indictment on war crimes charges. Now, last week, a state lawyer made the announcement of the Sudanese president's departure. Moments after that, Judge Dunstan Mlambo ordered preparations for Bashir's arrest. Government earlier said it offered Bashir immunity because he was attending an African Union summit here in Johannesburg. The ICC in The Hague indicted Bashir for war crimes in Sudan's western Darfur as far back as 2003. Now, our reporter Nzanji Chauke, he joins us from the North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria. Very good morning to you, Nzanji. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, good morning, Evan.
Nzanji, just give us the expectation of this morning. How will matters proceed courtside?
Yes, even there's a hive of activity here outside the North Gauteng High Court. The media getting themselves ready to come and cover these proceedings. As you know, that there's a lot of controversy regarding to that safe passage that was given to the Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir last week. As I speak to you right now, we understand that the proceedings will be getting underway just after 11. I haven't seen as yet any of the role players, but we understand that the proceedings will be starting just after 11.
Now, in Parliament last night, Nzanji, we saw several ANC MPs come forth and said that the ANC should withdraw, and that's the sentiment. Do you think that this sentiment of the ANC's withdrawal from the ICC will make or form part of some sort of defence?
Well, it remains to be seen today what sort of presentations are going to be made by state lawyers today. But just watching the proceedings from last week, it was quite shocking when we were watching that court hearing live, as that state lawyer was saying that as far as he knows, the Sudanese president was still here in the country. When other media was already tweeting and releasing information that he had actually left, but he gave his word to the court saying that according to the Home Affairs Director General, Omar al-Bashir was still in the country. But I think it also put to test the independence of the judiciary in the country. And then here we're seeing that conflict situation between the court and the state. But as you heard already, there are already sentiments to the effect that South Africa might withdraw from the International Criminal Court. There's been concern that some of these countries that have been pushing for the arrest of Omar al-Bashir are not even signatories to the Rome Statute, Yeben.
Njanji, the ICC has seen, Gwede Mantashe earlier in the week said the ICC has become a tool for the strong to continually oppress the weak. That is the sentiment. Yes, but also then tell us the outcomes of today, either way, what do you see?
Yes, those are very strong words indeed. And I mean, the ANC, the stance that he has taken, really it says a lot about what they think of the International Criminal Court. You'll recall that so far, when you look at the track record of the International Criminal Court, none of the leaders or people who have committed war crimes from the so-called the Western world have been tried by the ICC. We've seen mostly people from the African continent being tried by the ICC. So those are some of the concerns that have been raised by the African leaders. And we also know the issue of Omar al-Bashir having been invited here, not necessarily by the South African government, but he was here under the auspices of the African Union. The African Union saying that all the leaders were given diplomatic unity. In past instances, we've seen people that are being sought for war crimes going to the United Nations right there in New York, those people not being arrested. But questions were asked, why is Omar al-Bashir when he was here in South Africa, and now there's this call for his arrest, Yeben?
Njanji, thank you for that update. Njanji is live outside the court. We'll be live inside the court at 10 o'clock this morning on this very channel to bring you, the judge's reasoning, and we'll stay in court for as long as proceedings continue this morning. How do you view it? Is it political opportunism by opposition parties here in South Africa? What has the ICC become? The argument put forward by Gwede Mantashe a little bit earlier in the week was that it's become a tool for the strong to oppress the weak. Your views at SABC Newsroom. That's where we want you to interact with us on this very platform. We love your comments. We love your pictures more. Send it. We'll try and put it up a little bit later in the show, wherever we find time. Now, today, 20 years ago, the Springboks won the Rugby World Cup here in South Africa, and the victory unified all South Africans after a transition from an apartheid government. The event marked the start of the new democratic South Africa. Today's tweet pick of the day, well, comes from Holy Rosary School. Captioned, it's 20 years to the day since South Africa won the 1995 Rugby World Cup, beating the All Blacks. What a powerful moment. I was there, broadcasting live from the event 20 years ago. Can you imagine? Time flies, yeah? It was 15-12 in the end, drop kick by Joel Stransky. I was on the halfway line, sailed over. It was the most emotional thing that I've ever experienced when 60,000 people jumped up as one man. An incredible memory that will live with me forever. Only surpassed by Nelson Mandela handing the trophy to Francois Pienaar after that. Let's move on. Let's now take a look at the front pages from around the world. We start in Europe, where the Times reports that Buckingham Palace triggered a major row over royal funding last night by claiming that Scotland will cut its contribution towards the monarchy under David Cameron's devolution deal with Nicola Sturgeon. Now, 2 billion rand to do the upkeep of Buckingham Palace? How do you view that? We've got similar scenarios playing out here in South Africa, and we're causing quite a stir about it. In Washington, the Washington Post reports the killing of 9 black worshippers at the church in South Carolina has compelled President Barack Obama to look back with anger, then melancholy, and finally some distance at the two most intractable issues he has faced as president, namely guns and race. Finally, in China, the South China Morning Post reports that Washington has welcomed Beijing at the table to set new rules for global affairs. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden said yesterday, launching key security and economic talks between the two countries. Back here in South Africa, this is what's happening here in the capital, Pretoria, where the High Court, of course, is expected to give reasons for its ruling that Sudanese President Bashar Omar al-Bashir, rather, be kept in South Africa and arrested. We'll be live at the court at 10 o'clock this morning. Then in Kimberley, judgment is expected to be handed down by the High Court in the trial of ANC Provincial Chairperson John Block, Alvin Boertes and Trifecta Director Christos Scholz, who are also accused of fraud, corruption and money laundering. We'll get an update from Ulrich after the break. In Cape Town, the woman accused of kidnapping a baby from Groote Schuur Hospital 18 years ago is back in the magistrate's court there. Zephany Nurse was snatched from the hospital when she was only 3 days old. Now, time for us to take a break. When we come back, we'll be at the Trifecta trial in Kimberley. Don't go away.
I know a better route. Incoming. Watch out. Let's brighten it up a little. I can handle this. Engineered intuition. The new Audi A6.
In Africa, mobile devices are tools to make payments, browse the internet, and keep governments in check with social media forums.
It's given an average African too much power in their hands.
And tech creativity is solving some of the continent's problems.
Everything is internet driven.
And on Network, we tell you how Africans are using technology and social media in their everyday lives.
Join Siphumelele Zondi on Network every Sunday at 19:30 CAT.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom here on SABC News. As I said earlier, judgment is expected to begin today in the Northern Cape High Court in Kimberley in the multi-million rand fraud, corruption and money laundering case involving ANC Provincial Chairperson John Block, Provincial Secretary Alvin Boertes and then businessman Christos Scholz. The three are facing the charges related to the leasing of a government building. A fourth accused, Yolanda Botha, has since passed on. The accused have pleaded not guilty to all the charges against them or their businesses. Now, SABC reporter Ulrich Hendricks is outside the court in Kimberley. A very good morning to you, Ulrich. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, good morning, Evan.
Ulrich, this matter has been going on for quite some time. What's the expectation of today?
Well, the case has been going on for 3 years, as you say. It's quite a lengthy time in any case. So the judge last month, when the state and the defense concluded their final arguments, set out 3 days. That is from today until Friday to basically deliver a judgment. What we've just heard from court orderlies and as well as the state prosecutor is that the judge has indicated that she might not be ready to start delivering a judgment today. That is because she still needs some time to get the judgment together. Not something that I'm totally surprised about, because as you know, the case was 3 years. There's thousands of pages of documents and evidence and witnesses' testimony that she needs to go through. Also, when they did final arguments, lawyers for the defense and for the state as well quoted case law that she also needs to then go and look at and make up her mind about the guilt or not of the accused in this case.
Ulrich, if you can just take us back to the case against these gentlemen, if you can simplify it for us quickly.
Well, in 2005 and a couple of years before that, the SASA, which is a welfare organization with the state, wanted to get into the Northern Cape and to get the presence in the Northern Cape. They needed buildings, and they identified that they needed buildings in Kimberley, Douglas, the R, Uppington and Springbok. These then had to be leased, and the state basically alleged that when they started acquiring those buildings, the Social Development Department, on behalf of SASA, that Trifecta was giving a head start or got the tenders through corrupt means by way of getting heavyweight politicians in their pockets. Alvin Botha, who is the Deputy Secretary of the ANC in the province, the chairperson John Block as well, and former treasurer of the ANC and ANC MP Yolanda Botha, who has since passed. The state alleged that they received monies to basically give Trifecta a better chance, or to get Trifecta the tenders.
Ulrich, opposition parties, they voiced their dissatisfaction with the court process until now. Can you give us a little bit of insight into that, and also tell us what are the people in the streets saying about this case and about John Block in particular?
Well, John Block remains a very high-profile politician within the province. He yields extreme power, by the virtue of the position that he holds within the ANC. And so all the opposition parties across the spectrum have been calling for him to be axed, or for him to resign pending these allegations and the cases against him. Yesterday the ANC obviously said that they would like this case to be finalized as well. They still support their leader, while the DA, COPE and the EFF has repeated their calls that he needs to resign, and to make sure that stability and integrity is brought back to the provincial government, where he is a finance MEC. So they very worried about the fact that someone who's accused of fraud and corruption is basically handling the purse of this province.
Ulrich, thank you very much for that update. Ulrich Hendricks outside the Kimberley Magistrates Court. Of course, Ulrich will also, on all our other platforms throughout the rest of the day, keep us updated as to the developments in this case. He says it might not proceed today. 3 days have been set aside for judgment, but this case has been dragging on for 3 years now. We move on, as we always do, the death toll from an ongoing heat wave in Pakistan's southern Sindh province has passed 700 now. That's more than 250 in the last 24 hours. How do you view this, and what are people in Pakistan saying about this? Nurbam says the government's so adept at digging up roads and leaving unfilled for months. Why can't they dig some and fill it with water for the people to cool down? He talks about the heat wave in Pakistan. Ryan Larkin says, I don't think you understand, man. 700 people died of a heat wave, and yet we wake up every morning saying everything's okay. We don't have much of an option, do we, Ryan? EHS. Pakistan hasn't seen a heat wave, high temperatures for the first time. The cues, therefore, should be, what's different this time? Why so many deaths? We had more than 2,000 in India last month. Pray for Karachi. Last day in Karachi, 778 people died due to heat wave. May Pakistan survive till doomsday, said Mohammed Zain, I would think. Mahrain, Zara Malik says, urban heat island effect, when heat wave transforms a city into a furnace where citizens swelter, suffer, or even die. Hashtag Karachi, a coastal city, mind you, where people are dying during a heat wave. It is quite incredible to get your head around so many people dying during a heat wave. Now, let's take a look at our tweet of the day. Today's one comes from Rabia Anum, saying, let us all pray that this day becomes a better day for Karachi Valas. May Allah shower His blessings and rain as Abr-i Rahmat. Ameen, she says. Now, of course. It is Ramadan, and it is quite an affliction to suffer during this holy month. Now, let's take a look at what's on our Newsroom Facebook page. Hundreds of people have marched through the streets of Pietermaritzburg here in South Africa to oppose Eskom's application for an electricity tariff increase. Then Mali's foreign minister has pressed the United Nations Security Council to review the possibility of authorizing a sub-regional intervention force to tackle terrorists and drug traffickers in the region there. And of course, American President Barack Obama ignited a storm of social media debate when he used a racial phrase in an interview posted online that discussed race relations following the recent killings of 9 black churchgoers. For more news and updates, go to Facebook, put in SABC Newsroom, our page will pop up, click on it, you'll get all the latest updates. Or you can go to the big page, sabc.co.za/news, for all the updates all of the time. This is Newsroom. We will be back with you after another short little commercial break.
Nelson Mandela, that was for me having an opportunity to make a film about something he said. He's one of my heroes and he makes me proud to be African.
Mandela spent 27 years in Robben Island and in other jails as a result of his struggle to end apartheid in South Africa before becoming the country's first black president in 1994.
So you make movies, like Spielberg?
Yeah, I make movies like Spielberg.
Join Musam Khalipi on Afro Showbiz every Saturday at 19:30 CAT.
Welcome to Network, a technology news program that also discusses what's trending in social media in and around Africa. MTN has launched its new movie and television streaming service, Front Row. If it's trending, we will find it. That's Network with me, Siphumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. only on the SABC News Channel.
Watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. Government is expected to present an affidavit to the High Court in Pretoria today on the Omar al-Bashir saga. Last week, the Sudanese president left South Africa while an interim court order prohibiting this was in place. The High Court ruled that al-Bashir should be detained under an International Criminal Court indictment on war crime charges. Judgment is expected to begin today in the John Block and Trifecta fraud case. The judgment in the multi-million rand fraud, corruption and money laundering case will be handed down in the Northern Cape High Court. The case involving members of the ANC provincial government relates to the leasing of office space from the Trifecta group of companies at inflated prices. And 2 South African youths taken from their grandmother's home in Mpumalanga have been handed to South African government officials in Malawi. It's alleged the 2 were lured by a Malawian woman with promises of a better education in the United Kingdom. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Janine. Now, young men in South Africa and the rest of the continent are said to be increasingly at risk of getting testicular cancer. This type of cancer is said to be rare amongst the overall male population, but it's one of the most common cancers occurring in younger men. That's men between the ages of 15 and 39. although older men can also develop it. Now, to talk to us about this, we are joined in studio by Professor Michael Herbst, the head of health at the Cancer Association of South Africa. Very good morning to you.
Morning, Evan. Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Just put us in the picture about it. It looks alarmist almost to say this, but the fact that young men are increasingly at risk or are at risk is quite interesting.
It is. It's very interesting to note, and we don't know the reason for that. But most probably it is because the testes at that period of time between, well, starting a little bit earlier than 15, is very active in what it produces, both the hormones as well as sperm. And that is most probably why, with a greater activity taking place in the testes.
It's also it's interesting that the same group are also the ones who involved in the most risky behavior in general.
Isn't this sad, though? And that's why I think it's wonderful that we have the opportunity to talk about this in Youth Month. Yes. To say to the young people, these are the signs and symptoms, these are the risk factors, what can you do to protect yourself?
Just tell us about testicular cancer. It's not something that we talk about in polite conversation every day, but it's real. What are the major causes of it, and what should young men be on the lookout for?
We don't really know the causes of testicular cancer, and this is what makes it a little bit more difficult, although we do know the risks. And some of the risks include having had an undescended testes. That is where the testes didn't move down immediately after birth or during the birth or just prior to that into the scrotum. So that is definitely one risk factor. Also, having a history of testicular cancer. Once you've had it on one side, there's always a greater risk of getting it on the other side. Being white is another high risk. We know that the incidence is higher amongst white young men. HIV infection is another leading problem. And so these are some of the things that we need to look at. And interestingly, it being a type of cancer that is linked to the hormonal system of the body, even if there is a history of breast cancer in the family of the male, we know that the incidence of testicular cancer is also higher.
This is very, very interesting statistics. Where do you come about this? Are these official trials that have been done? Are the official trials underway to have a look at what's causing this amongst young men?
Well, I can tell you researchers are on the lookout every day to try and find the real causes. But the risks have definitely been identified amongst thousands of men who have been diagnosed. And that is where we get the list of risks from.
Is it curable?
This is the wonderful thing. If we know our bodies, and we can, as soon as something different occurs, we can identify it and then go for medical help. The earlier it is diagnosed, the better the treatment. And if diagnosed early, I can say it's nearly 100% cure rate.
And what's your advice then, Professor, to young men, men who are at risk, and also to older gentlemen if they maybe see changes in their physiology?
Well, I'll tell you, we've got to know our bodies. And there's only one way of knowing your body is by exploring it. And to do this regularly. Don't wait for 6 months and then want to explore your testicles. Do this regularly. Do it monthly after a nice warm bath or a shower. And feel what they feel like. Is it nice and smooth and consistent? Are there any lumps? Is there any tenderness? Is there any swelling? Or is there any shrinking of a testicle? So when any of these signs appear, I know our men are terrible at health-seeking behavior.
Yes.
But please go and do yourself and your loved ones a favor. Go for medical aid and make sure. Most of the problems that we experience in testicles is usually not cancerous, but who are we to decide? Let's leave it to the scientists to tell us.
Well, Professor, thank you for joining us. It's a very interesting topic. I can tell you, though, that, I'm not guilty of not exploring that kind of area. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you for joining us and telling us, yes, it's a real risk. Testicular cancer amongst young men between 15 and 39, increasingly at risk of testicular cancer. It's something that Professor Herbst tells us you should explore your body and you should know when changes occur. Thank you. Now, we look back at one of the highlights on this day. The Springboks beat New Zealand during the Rugby World Cup finals in 1995. It was a landmark day for myself as a human being. One of my very first live crossings I did at the event was in the stadium. The jet flew over. It was simply an amazing experience. Here are some of your views Ongapotse says, 24 June, Rugby World Cup, Springboks, big smiles. Yes, loving your work. Kimotopia says, 20 years since South Africa hoisted the Rugby World Cup. There you have a wonderful picture of the haka before that match. Those days, the haka was not as passionate as it is today, but they were allowed to almost run up at each other. Kuduro says, I saw the Springboks win over the All Blacks in '95 Rugby World Cup, back when the haka was met up close and personal. Isn't that a lovely picture? And there you have Leanne Manus, our very own Good Morning Lives. Leanne says, on this day exactly 20 years ago, 24 June 1995, the World Cup the world watched on in admiration. There we have Francois Pienaar, Nelson Mandela. There's the trophy aloft with that iconic team. Joost van der Westhuizen and James Small, guys in the picture there. It was an amazing time in the history of our country. Some say the making of our nation, the time when we unified, when we got to be together and we became South Africa. Now, finally, bestiality has once again come to light after a man was caught having sex with a goat in Sharpeville, south of Gauteng, here in South Africa. The SPCA said the goat was found alive but died later. Now, in the past few years, there have been quite a few of these cases that have made the headlines. Last year, a man from Mpumalanga was fined 500 Rand for bestiality with a chicken. In a separate incident yesterday involving animal cruelty, a pair were each fined 30,000 Rand in Zastron here in South Africa for giving a monkey brandy and coke. The pair were also found guilty of transporting another monkey to the Free State without the necessary documentation. They were fined a further 10,000 Rand. Now today, here on Newsroom, we asked the SPCA, is there an increase? How common are these cases? What is happening? Now, from the National Council of the SPCA, we're joined by Jaco Pieterse, who is the Manager Society Liaison. A very good morning to you, Jaco. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben. Thank you for having us.
We see these disturbing cases in the media at the moment. Bestiality, feeding monkeys, brandy and coke, and that sort of thing. Do you deal with this kind of scenarios at the SPCA often, or is it the exception rather?
Sadly, the SPCA is inundated with cruelty to animal cases, so our inspectors around the country work tirelessly to prevent cruelty of different degrees and different types of cruelty.
What are the most common cases that you deal with?
Most common cases are animals that are chained or starved, basically also left without shelter, especially with the cold winter upon us. But also there are various other cases of cruelty also which are more severe, like bestiality or where animals are abused in other instances.
I want to talk about this bestiality case because periodically here in South Africa we see bestiality cases pop up. Is it something that you're seeing as an increase in South Africa? And should society in general be alarmed and on the lookout for this kind of thing?
Well, sadly, most cases are not reported to authorities because people don't know it's illegal. Bestiality is illegal in South Africa, and it occurs with dogs, cats, farm animals, donkeys. Even we saw a case with a chicken, as you mentioned earlier. So basically it is illegal, and we urge the public to report it because cases of bestiality later turns into child rape cases or even adult people being raped.
Now, you say it's illegal. It's one thing for something to be illegal. It's another thing for it to be policed and for there to be convictions. Do we see enough convictions for these kinds of crimes here in South Africa?
Well, sadly, with the no numbers of being reported to the authorities, convictions are quite low. But the SPCA works hand in hand with the South African Police Service to ensure that the suspects are brought to book and that the highest sentence possible is invoked by the magistrate.
Now, the one case that's an interesting case here is the one that was before the courts yesterday in the Free State, where we talk about the monkeys that were being fed brandy and coke, not once, but over an extended period, so much so that this monkey started acting out and were falling around almost on a sort of daily basis. How do you view that kind of case, and what do we as the public do when we see people using wild animals in that sort of scenarios in South Africa?
Well, at the end of the day, those monkeys remain wild animals and they should not be in captivity. And in nature, in their natural habitat, they won't be drinking alcohol, and it's not good for monkeys or any animal for that matter to consume alcohol. And those particular monkeys were badly emaciated, which means that there was a negative effect from not being fed the correct diet, and those monkeys suffered a tremendous cruelty.
And alcoholism or alcohol over a period of time, how does it affect these wild animals?
Well, ultimately for any animal, their liver is not made to break down the alcohol in their system, so obviously it has a negative effect on the animals.
What are some of the other concerns that you have with wild animals here in South Africa? Like we see there, transport without a license, but are there other scenarios, like trade in endangered species and the like that you see on the increase?
Well, trading in wildlife is enormous in South Africa, and also animals used in circuses, wild animals used in circuses. The SPCA is strongly opposed to that because ultimately animals are not, wild animals are not there for entertainment purposes, and they shouldn't be used for entertainment or trading.
It's concerning that these acts like bestiality and the like normally escalates and becomes something worse, like child rape, rape in general, and so forth.
That's correct, and that to us you have to curb the problem from the beginning. And even with animal abuse, it's a proven fact that most serial killers or criminals have abused an animal at one point in their life.
Yeah, that's true. I've read some of the statistics on that. It is quite scary. Jaco, thank you for joining us. That's Jaco Pieterse. He's the Manager Society Liaison of the National Council of the SPCA. Join us live here in the Newsroom studio. Talk about cruelty toward animals. If you see anyone acting in a cruel manner in any way to a wild or domesticated animal, contact the SPCA immediately. They can deal with these issues. Thank you, Jaco.
Thank you for having us.
Brilliant. Newsroom, of course, broadcast live from our studios here in Auckland Park every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. We also stream live on YouTube at that time. And remember, the show's available on demand throughout the day on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.